Well, good evening, everybody. And Philip, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here in this wonderful theatre and to address the question and the challenge that is posed in the theme here tonight of Ireland's Edge. And I first gained an insight, and one of the strongest insights I've had, into what Ireland's Edge is and where we are in the world that was painted there, when I was in the back seat of a taxi in the capital city of Malawi. And the capital city of Malawi is a city called Lilongwe. And I was over there a number of years ago with my then colleague Alex White. And we went over and spent a week with Trócaire. And we wanted to spend a week with that charity because both of us wanted to understand the work that is undertaken by our country abroad, helping those who are often the most vulnerable. And Lilongwe is renowned across Africa as being one of the most congested cities of that continent. So when you're in a taxi in that city, you spend a lot of time talking to the person driving the taxi. So I was chatting away to the taxi driver, and he asked us where we're from. And we said, well, from Ireland. He asked, what are we doing here? And we explained. And he said, have you heard of An Garda Síochána? And I said, haven't I just? I said, yes, of course I have. And got into a fascinating discussion with that gentleman. Because when Malawi was in the process of butting together an unarmed police force that could be seen to implement the law effectively in what was then a very troubled region and country, they turned to An Garda Síochána for advice about how to do it. And they did this decades ago. And in honour of the role of the then Guards in helping their country rise to a real challenge, they named the headquarters, the first headquarters of their police force in Malawi, they called Phoenix Park House. And later on that week, I was going up the side of a hill in the middle of absolutely nowhere to see an engineering facility that your money paid for, that brought light and hope to a community. And the gentleman who was taking me up the side of the hill, his name was Fóric. And his name was Fóric because he thought that's how you pronounce pork. And he did it because of how he was taught by an Irish person in the local primary school that he went to that had a class of around 80 in it with one Irish teacher. And that gave me an insight then, and it's something I've had an opportunity to see again and again, about what a global footprint can look like and what the ability is of a country to project itself into the world, particularly a small country like our own on the edge of Europe. So I think that forms part of the answer of what an edge looks like. But the question is, what does the edge look like in a world that is changing? And I'm just going to offer a few thoughts in relation to that. I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is the degree of change that is underway and how exponential that change is. Richard Haas, who was nominated by a number of American presidents to play a role in the peace process in Northern Ireland and was a former advisor to the White House on the Middle East, has just published a book whose title really says it all. And the book is simply entitled A World in Disarray. And what he describes is the kind of order and the kind of change that is underway is shifting. He didn't say it's coming apart, but he just said the foundations upon which the kind of order that we are all used to, that our country has designed itself within, those foundations are moving at the moment. And the clearest personal example that I had of that was the morning after the Brexit referendum. I, like many Irish people, am deeply intertwined with what happens in the UK. I lived there for 6 years. My wife is English. A lot of my family live in the UK. I spend a lot of time visiting the country. And I remember that night, as I was staying up to watch the result, I saw the results come in from Sunderland, which is a part of the UK I know well because I lived in Newcastle for a year. And when I saw the result coming through from Sunderland, I just turned off the telly because I knew what the result was going to be. And I remember the following morning going into my little boy's room to pull back the curtains and get ready for school. And it hit me with a bolt that the kind of political freedoms that I have been lucky enough to enjoy and the kind of political institutions that I've been privileged enough to participate in, I can't take it for granted that my kids are going to be able to experience those in the same way. And they might not experience the level of freedom and the level of stability that I've known my adult life in. And that kind of change will have so many different routes. It will have some of the changes that Philip touched on, what's happening geopolitically at the moment, the role of technology. I'm just back from spending a number of days in MIT in Boston. In the area around MIT and Boston, they generate each year 3% of global national income. So out of every $100 made across the world, they generate 3 of those dollars from that footprint in America. And they do that because of the exponential change that is underway and they're researching on in relation to artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, and what that will mean for the workplace. And that's even before we go into the changes that we're all so familiar with in terms of what's happening with our climate, what's happening in migration. So that's the kind of change that is underway. So amidst those kind of challenge, the question then is, how is Ireland positioned against all of this? Now, I'm an optimist by nature, but I also believe I'm an optimist by relation to history when it comes to a country like Ireland. And I believe a quality that will come to the fore amidst the kind of change that I've referenced is a direct point in relation to our edge. And that is that I believe across the coming years, it will be more possible for small, open countries to respond back to the kind of change I'm talking about and surf on those waves of change in a way that can be secure for their citizens by virtue of their smallness and by virtue of their openness. Why does smallness matter? Smallness matters because in the kind of world that we're in, countries like Ireland, like Singapore, countries like New Zealand, have the intimacy that yields the ability to respond back to big change. And our country has done this at various points in our history, most notably in responding back to what happened in our economy over the last decade. Why does openness matter? Openness matters because we're in an interdependent, globalized world. And the kind of changes that I refer to, whether we like them or not, because we're in an interdependent world, they're coming at us. And if you're used to openness, and if you trade, and if you're culturally aligned to that kind of openness, you've got a good chance of being able to respond back to it well. So what does all that look like? What are the blocks of edge? And I'm going to suggest, for the purposes of debate here this evening, that there's 4 of them. And as I suggest this to you, one poet that keeps on coming back again and again to me as I think about this, and a line that he wrote, isn't unfortunately an Irish poet, but there's many such poets that speak to this, is the American poet Walt Whitman. When he was writing about something very different, he said, to paraphrase him, he said, "I am large, I am multitudes." And I think the trick that we can do if we're small is we can use our intimacy, we can use our agility to generate that sense of multitude, to be as big as some of the challenges that we will respond back to. So how can we do it? I think there's 4 C's that will be at the heart of it. The first one is culture. And this is why I was delighted on behalf of the government to sponsor and help support the Creative Ireland programme. If you were a country that finds a way of using culture as being a source of inclusivity and openness, you will stand out in the world that we are in. Because in the world that we're in at the moment, more and more we're seeing culture being used as a wedge. If we can generate culture as a source of openness, that's something that our country can benefit and prosper so much from. And it's already happening in so many different art forms. In the week I was in, which I mentioned a moment ago when I was over in America at MIT, when I was in Boston, Lisa Hannigan was performing. When I was in Washington, Bell X1 were performing. And that kind of penetration is already underway. But the Creative Ireland programme is seeking to put a structure and a fund behind us to harness all the different forms of creativity that our country has to offer. I think the second C is certainty. Amidst the change that is going on, a change whose rate of acceleration is going to increase. Its roots will be in technology. If you can offer certainty in a small number of big areas, the ability of a society to win big is just huge. What could that certainty be? I think a very topical and pressing example, and something that's close to our DNA, is the ability to treat citizens well when they're in your country, regardless of where they come from. Another source of what certainty can look like will be how you do manage information. Another source will be how do you manage regulation. And the insight that we've had again and again in relation to corporation tax is as important as the rate is, what's as important is stability and predictability regarding what it will be in the future. And if you spend time in Asia at the moment, and if you spend time in some parts of America, if you can offer that certainty to people abroad, let alone your citizens at home, who I'm privileged to represent, it offers benefits that I think we don't yet recognize. The last two C's are competitiveness. We don't have our own currency. The fact that we don't have our own currency, our own national currency, is a source of strength because that plays to our ability to trade. We have to make stuff. We have to make services. We have to generate things that our own people want to buy and that other people across the world want to buy. And if you can do that through a currency that you share with others, the benefits will be very, very big. And we've shown that in recent years here in Ireland. And the final C, which is one I care so deeply about, is the centre. And Philip referred to the centre, from the centre to the edge and back again. The centre I care so much about is the political centre. Having a consensus within society in where you can moderately debate choices, look at things we need to do differently, but conscious of the context that we have and the constraints that we have. But if you can do it in a tone that's inclusive of all in your country, again, I think that's a crucial part of what the edge can look like. So just in conclusion, a while ago, a number of weeks ago, this wonderful theatre hosted the dramatisation of a novel by one of my favourite writers here in Ireland, Donohoe. And Donald's novels and his short stories speak so strongly of where our country was, where it is, and I hope where it might go to. And he has a line in one of his novels that I leave as my challenge. And it's a challenge that I have to put to myself, and I do put to myself every day. He said, one of his characters said, all talk is lies in a way. Only the doing of it makes it true. And I think that's the challenge and the opportunity that we all face, that in the world that we're in, with what we have achieved, there is yet so much that can be achieved by sharpness of what an edge looks like, by openness and inclusivity, to reflect the world that we're in, but to play to our glorious strengths of an open, a small, a trading and an inclusive country. Thank you.